Welcome to another episode of Meet the Artist. Today we've got an entrepreneur, public figure, inspiration, philosophical, highly educated individual. You know, someone who's done a lot of work in the community with young people and just diverse range of people I've seen across the board. Craig Pinkney, how you doing today, bro?
I'm good, bro. I'm good. Sunday morning, going into the afternoon. I'm feeling good, bro.
Yeah.
But just nice to just be in a space around knowledge, and just I have to always just kind of, commend the works of people like yourself and those in the background, because oftentimes we always talk about how do we enable the people to hear our voices and see us so we can be visible. A lot of people complain from their keyboards or behind their TV, so you man are actually doing the work. So whilst you congratulate me for the work that I do and give me my flowers, it's also right that I give you your flowers and that too. So keep pushing the word, King.
Thank you, and thank you for coming on the platform. You know what I mean? It's a pleasure to have you on here. You know what I mean? I think how I'm gonna dive into the conversation is I know that you've got an intense 20 years of experience. So could you let us in the highlights and checkpoints of how you've got here, and just give us some of the background? You know what I mean?
Yeah, man. It's a short but long story. And I guess coming from within the Birmingham community, I always have to pay homage to my family, the Pinkneys, the Williams, the Thompsons, because they gave me the foundation, my grandparents, and they were, I guess, activists, freedom fighters in the community at one point. So enough of the elders in the community that we would see as kind of activists now working in the community. My grandparents were individuals that essentially kind of set up community spaces in their houses. What we would probably call a youth club now is kind of what happened for them. So, when we think about like your 104 Saturday school movement, I guess a lot of the teachers and a lot of the kind of individuals that set those things up were young people at a time at my grandparents' house, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I guess, coming from a family that's got so much, wealth of knowledge, that kind of freedom fighter spirit. I guess I was just a child and young person that kind of grew around that, but really didn't acknowledge it until I probably got to my teenage years.
I think, sorry to cut you, but I think what's amazing is I'm starting to see a theme in individuals who are doing a lot of community work. The community started from their home. You know what I mean? So what we're trying to do now is give back to our communities by passing down knowledge. You know what I mean? So just hearing from your story, my story is quite similar, but my mum was more in the business world. But she had a way of nurturing individuals as well. So it's quite similar, giving back to the community in some form. But sorry to cut you, but I just
feel like, just with what you just said, I felt like I was quite unique when I was growing up, because I lived at home with both my mum and dad. And a lot of my cousins live with their parents as well. So whilst I lived in, B18, Hockley, Winson Green, there wasn't many of my friends that had both their mum and dad in the household. And I feel like that foundation also was an add-on to what my family already was creating within the local community.
Makes sense.
And I guess, when you go to secondary school, I think that was really when the penny dropped for me, in that I was different.
So what differences did you see? You have both of your parents within your household. What differences did you see with your peers who didn't? Like, dad's just mom.
I think it just was a level of authority and discipline. They all came from loving households. But my dad was like Lawrence Fishburne in Boys in the Hood. When it was 7 o'clock, try and know that you need to be in the yard by 6:59, or it was going to be a problem. And out of the embarrassment of the way that my dad was just moving around the close that I lived in, I just was making sure I was in at 6:58.
Makes sense.
So when I used to always say, it's funny, I say this all the time, I used to lie in my bed when it was time to go to bed, and I'd hear all the man them outside playing football and playing British Bulldog, and I used to sit there thinking, I hate my dad, man. I hate him, because I didn't understand it. And it's almost like he used to always kind of say to me subliminally that, you're going to watch enough of these people outside that don't go home at time. They go in bed at 11, 12 o'clock. It's those individuals that are going to be the ones that are not going to have a bright future. And I guess, you know, after years of seeing a lot of those individuals in my community end up in prison for murder, a lot of them in prison for selling drugs, or some of them ended up dying as a consequence to street violence. I guess as I am, you know, in my 30s now, late 30s, I get why my dad did it, and I think that's why I love him even more now. And I think when I talk about that kind of journey, you know, when you said what was the difference was that because I had external education, because I was part of the Saturday school movement. Anybody that knows about the Saturday school movement in Birmingham, I say it's foundation. You know, we're talking about Hockley Port and Marcus Garvey Centre, you know, 104. If I say these names and you're from the Northwest Corridor and you don't know, you just don't know. You know, and them ones. And there was loads of families, even if the young people weren't there, their families were connected to that, you know, Rastafarian roots. And that was kind of connected to us as a people. You know, we're talking about Pan-Africanism, we're talking about, you know, people trying to develop a knowledge of self. And it was kind of a momentum in the community at the time where you had, obviously, the Rasta community, you had the Nation of Islam that was kind of growing, you had, you know, the Hebrew Israelites, you had like quite a number of people that were essentially trying to find themselves and were going into spaces. So as a child, growing up in those different spaces, I felt like I had an extra knowledge. So when I was going to school, I didn't need the school to teach me about history, geography, mathematics and science. Even though we talk about things like Black History Month and the focus is history, I don't get why. Because it's more than just history. It's mathematics, it's science, it's geography, it's astronomy, and it's all of those different things that I think is really important to understanding oneself. So I had a strong identity. The problem was, though, is when I was at school, a lot of my peers weren't on the kind of same level of understanding as myself. So I kind of was put into a pigeonhole of like, you're stupid. And how mad is that? That even though
being different,
even though I'm probably intellectually smarter, I was told I was stupid because the things I'm talking about, nobody understands and it don't make sense. And I guess that kind of became, you know, a self-fulfilling prophecy where you start then believing those things. So when I kind of got to secondary school now and I'm in religious studies or I'm in science or I'm in maths and I'm saying things like Imhotep and why are we learning about Paul Newton and gravity and all of these things you know, the Greeks, you know, were students of the ancient Egyptians. Everybody's looking at me like I'm mad. So I kind of got to probably year 9, I would say, where education wasn't a thing for me in the context of the Western systems. So then when I got to year 11, it just became a bit of a joke where I didn't really take education seriously. And then subsequently probably only left school with, I think it was like probably 2 GCSEs. So then the good thing about coming from the family that I come from, there's a privilege with that because loads of people know my family. So even though I left school without the qualifications that would have put me in a good position to go to college and then subsequently university, I always had people that were looking out for us, you know, to give us a job, you know, to give us an opportunity. And that's how I kind of got into working with children. I wouldn't even call it youth work, but I'd say working with children because I used to play basketball at the time. And my local basketball coach was doing stuff at Newtown Community Centre where he was doing sports activities for children. And obviously at the time, this is when we were just getting our mobile phones. So I'm just like, like mum's saying like, you can have the mobile phone, but this pay-as-you-go thing don't make no sense.
I think you've hit on a lot of interesting topics. You know what I mean? Like the community centres, what we used to have, and now we've got a lack of them. You know what I mean? Because I used to go to Newtown Community Centre, Ladywood. I never used to live in those areas, but I would venture out to these. Some guys, you're gonna come and play football, and then you've also like hit a different spectrum, a different perspective. What a lot of people don't look at is, you know what? I have got my dad here, and I'm getting the knowledge. But I also, when you're young, get impressionable, so you want to fit in. You know what I mean? So sometimes you're getting the right stuff from home, and it could be from mum or dad, but because you're trying to fit into today's society or any society at being a youth, you kind of find it difficult. Like, I know this is right, but this is what my see what the man them or my peers are doing, or this is what females don't like or do not like, because everybody, it's an inclusive thing what we want to do as we evolve as young people into adults. So you've hit quite a lot of different topics. You get me? My thing will be, what do you, like, if I was to just ask you in a roundabout way, what do you feel like the community is lacking for us to get back in a more balanced state? Like having families together, work together in unison like they used to do before. Obviously, I'm not trying to say that was perfect, but that's some of the traditions need to come back, and morals and principles.
Real talk. I feel like there's it's a complex and nuanced question. Yeah. And I don't think it's as black and white. You know, it's multicolored, it's multifaceted. Yeah. So definitely. My subjective perspective, I look at it through my experiences and the things that I see. Like, I miss, you know, being around the elders. Yeah. You know, when we talk about intergenerational work, that's what's lacking. Like, I'm talking my nan's generation. 100%. You know, my grandma's like, she's the last one left. Yeah, you know, like, so when I talk about my children and them understanding, you know, Jamaica, the Caribbean, like, the second my grandma goes, what then? Yeah. You get what I'm saying? How do we, you know, continue that momentum? So I think intergenerational work, I think, is important and part of that story. Yeah. I also think that we have to also really start to look within. And I'm going to say it from my context, but hopefully those that are listening will understand. And it's almost like an exploration of oneself. Yeah. I feel like we've lost ourselves in this society because we live in a default capitalist society that kind of enables us to kind of just focus on getting things. Yeah. We forget about the things that are important, like family, like children. And I think that the way that I think technology, it removes us from what I call the human experience. Definitely. So we're not really checking in, and I feel guilty all the time. Sometimes when I'm up and down on the road, you know, working, you know, I think, you know, I need to check my nan. You know, I need to, you know, check in with my auntie. I need to check in with family members. But at the same time, I need to work. Yeah. And I guess the type of, you know, I got kids, bro. I got family. I've got people I'm responsible for to look after. So I'm getting the bag. Yeah. You understand what I'm saying? And I say that because I want to be in a situation where I can kick back in 10 years' time and say, you know what, I don't have to work as hard as my parents did. Definitely. So whilst I'm on that journey and that path of what I would call success to get that bag, there's the challenges that come with it. Then I also feel like we as a people as well, we've lost ourselves in the context of, you know, what I would say is in terms of that oneness of the creator, we're not really connecting to anything. So we're kind of spiritually dead. So when you actually put some of those things into context, you start to see that people are just kind of acting just very abstract to what their essential self essentially is. And then you've got to talk about economics. I don't think as a community we understand economics in a way that we do. I definitely don't. I feel like some of the traditions like Pardner and the way in which we understood economics and pulling together. You know, now we got pyramid schemes where people are just skanking each other. But Pardner was how we pooled our resources when the system said we can't get. And we focused on ways in which we could come together and pool our money in order for us to buy property, in order for us to be able to invest in something that we got a return that was beneficial to the people. Based on the capitalist society that we're in right now, as I said, everybody's trying to get it for themselves. We ain't thinking about together. So there's multiple things that I can say that impact us as a community. But those are the key things for me: economics, community, the exploration of oneself.
You've just highlighted two things to me. Just about growth. It's about unity, but loyalty within unity. Like, I do see that in a lot of other cultures, which we don't. But then the music which we buy into and the cultures what we buy into actually promote self-hate and segregation. But that's because we was going through so much oppression previously in previous generations. They had no option but to amalgamate together and work together for one common goal. You know what I mean? One team, one vision, one community, one vision. You know what I mean? But now it's like, just going off the back of what you're saying, I can see the separation, but then that's the lack of structure and order. And that comes from the family home. Sorry, I just wanted to add that.
And I think a lot of it is by design as well. The system has always known that there's always going to be power in the concept of family and unity. So if we can break down unity and we can remove men out of the household. We can put children in volatile scenarios and situations where they have to compromise their freedom because of survival. We're then able to kind of create what I would call an environment where things are happening and it's hard to kind of pull back. And I talk about this all the time, because then what happens then is you've got individuals like myself and others that really want to give back to the people, want to give back to the community, but then them environments then become dangerous. You know, and you know, we've seen it around the world. You know, you can look at, you know, your Nipsey Hussles, and you know, there's people that want to give back to their people, and it's the same people from the same environment that would turn around and murder you. You know, and because of the good that you're essentially doing, because you have jealousy, you have envy, you have hate, and you have you know, people that have, you know, these kind of high, not only kind of expectations, but they kind of, you know, believe that you're supposed to do something for them. And I think whilst you have those kind of, you know, these thoughts and sentiments from people, you know, people like myself have to be smart, and we have to be safe. And it's crazy because, you know, my son's 13 and almost turning 14, and it's mad that now I'm as a dad of many children, but just in terms of my oldest son, I'm having to now think about, you know, what safety looks like in the context of his world now. Because my world's different. I grew up in a time where I would defend myself. You know, I grew up in a time where if man tried it, we're moving to them.
But I think
it's a different time now.
Today's society,
these youths now is pulling out big Rambo and zombie knives. So now you've got to think about survival from the context of, is it worth it? You know, is it worth it? And I think that these things, whilst we talk about, you know, just community, and I say as a member of the community that's trying to give back to my community, but also as a father, and also as a family man and an individual that, you know, has loads of responsibilities within that, it is also, we have to talk about safety as well. And it's sad that the environment that we live in, that's been created, and I believe some of it is by design. And I think some of us don't want to hold each other accountable anymore. So the easiest thing to do is just to blame the system when we don't really want to look at oneself.
That kind of leads on to the next question. Like, what do you think denotes to creating a criminal mindset within any kind of individuals within these inner cities? You've hit a couple of things which I think answer it, but could you kind of dive in
just
deeper
to bring
from
it
your
back
experience?
again, another, you know, complex question that's also nuanced, and it's not necessarily about the blame game, but it's also about developing understanding. And I guess as a social scientist, that's what I do, to give understanding of the why environments are created in such a way that, you know, enable certain behaviors and mindsets to essentially manifest. So we can talk about, you know, the economic system, we can talk about poverty, we can talk about deprivation. And without insulting anyone's intelligence, we know that wherever there's high levels of deprivation and high levels of acute poverty, there's always going to be an issue around potential antisocial, criminal, deviant mindset.
100%.
Because you're talking about the haves versus the have-nots. You know, let's just go back to the riots, you know, just over, you know, 2011. We were talking about going through austerity and people didn't have nothing. So people were prepared to kick off the door of Asda and Boots and all those places just to steal nappies. So we're living in an environment where those things are kind of set sometimes by default. Then you've also got to talk about things like the education system. You know, we're talking about poor education. You know, we're not talking about mainstream education that ticks the box for Ofsted, for example, where, you know, children are just regurgitating information that actually doesn't really benefit their lives, but it benefits the system because it can say, you know, these children from these particular environments, you know, they've gone through that rigor, and we can tick the box to say that they've passed, but it doesn't really give them the quality of life.
Them with proper education.
So then when we talk about that, then you've also got to talk about, you know, some of the historic issues as well. I think that we talk about the here and now, but don't talk about the past. History gives us a really important teacher in terms of understanding the issues are today. So
100%.
There's loads of historical journeys, and especially when we're talking about, like, for example, my family coming from the Windrush era. My family didn't come as thieves and robbers and gangsters and drillers. You know, so what happened?
Educated.
So that we have to address what happened. Why now that when people look at themselves in terms of a reflection, we've got this hyper masculine, toxic way of being, where our great grandparents didn't move like this.
Have it.
So something happened.
And if you know where you're coming from, you know where you're going.
All right, so, but that's been disconnected through education and also through the dysfunction that exists within our communities. And then also you got to talk about things like trauma. You know, trauma that's not necessarily from the perspective of somebody going through it, but I'm going to talk about vicarious trauma, where you live in environments where people are watching and witnessing and hearing stories about madness. Then now we've got technology now where you can sit at the comfort of your home and watch madness. There was a video circulating only a few weeks ago where a young brother from the community was being stabbed under a camera. These are the type of things we're watching now. So I'm going to go back to my point about that. My 14-year-old son is then going to try and navigate throughout this community and society, and he's thinking, yo, can this potentially happen to me? Then that links to fear. So from vicarious trauma, you have children and young people in the environment that have real fears because something's happened to them, but then you've also got perceived notions of fear. And then when you talk about perceived notions of fear, the counter argument will be is then what do some children and young people do when they feel that they're unsafe in the environments in which they live? And the narratives that you get from films, the narrative that you get from games, the narrative that you get from songs, the narrative that you may get from some individuals in the community is you need to arm yourself.
Definitely.
And that education, going back to the point of education, isn't the greatest, but from the context of survival, may make sense to some of those children and young people. You get what I mean?
100%.
So you might have children and young people now that arm themselves because they're worried about those fears based on the vicarious trauma that's been created by some of these social factors that essentially exist. And then the problem then also then is you've got some young people that say, well, I'm not really bad with the weapon, but I'm bad in numbers. So then individuals that live in my community, on my street, on my cul-de-sac, on my estate, and we've got all the same marginalized experiences. It's just mommy in the home. You know, I don't really see my dad like that, or my dad's locked up, or my older brother's in jail. School's not really connecting with me because they don't understand me, and all of my teachers are not like that.
Closest form of unity.
The group, then what we're talking about when we talk about community, that becomes their community. Problem is that then when they're in their little packs of community, we go back to the conversation earlier on that we just spoke about economics. No one ain't got no money. So again, when we talk about ways to make money now, you've got organized criminals that we don't ever talk about in our society. We blame the youths, but we don't talk about the individuals that bring cocaine and heroin into our country, and they somehow find a way to use our young people to exploit them in order to sell those things. And then what we do as the state is that we blame them, we incarcerate them, and then we throw away the key and say, look,
I think because I come from like a care background like yourself, like what I want to add to what you're saying from the comprehension of what you're trying to convey is that the society looks at the behavior of a certain sector of individuals and not the triggers to the behaviors. And if they're dealt with the triggers, then the behaviors will change, and the environments these triggers come from, then the behaviors will change. But then you're saying systematically people are programmed to have these behaviors, so then they fit certain stereotypes which suit certain individuals and keeps other individuals in certain places. And like you said, it's a very deep and complex. When it comes to trauma, it's just from so many different angles you can look on it, from the mum, from the dad, because they all have backstories. Like you're saying, they're not like our grandparents had backstories. You know what I mean? And then if that knowledge of the backstory is cut off, then all you've got is the now. And the now is, like you're saying, corruption, the media, music, film. They're all influential, you know what I mean? And then a lot of people who are in the music industry, because I'm from a musical background, they live a decent life. So it's like a smart person playing a fool. But you can't get a fool playing a smart person, you know what I mean? So, just to add on to what you were saying.
And the conversation's deep, man. And that's why, going back to your question, you know, when we talk about those environments that create these particular behaviors and particular mindsets, there's also the other aspect of that as well, which is around accountability. And one of the things I don't like to do is just kind of have this kind of narrative and notion that whilst we know that the systemic issues do exist, there is also accountability that we hold as individuals. We're in a time of, you know, we can get information now just from a click of a button.
Yeah.
You know, they used to say that if you want to hide, you know, information from a slave, you should put it in a book.
Yeah.
We don't really need books now, but I do believe in reading, if that makes sense. But we've got audio books now, you've got, you know, YouTube, you've got Google, and the information is there. So whilst that information is there, I do believe that there is a responsibility from those of us within the community to not rely on the system and the state to teach our children and young people what we should be teaching ourselves. 100%. And that's so when you look at some other communities, that's where they do really well. Is that they have what I would call a secondary education. So I don't know whether it's a child from, I don't know, the Sikh community, for example, they go temple after school. You know, whether it's someone from the Muslim community, they go to the mosque, the masjid after school. And generally, when you look at, you know, not just, you know, children that come from, you know, African or African Caribbean backgrounds, you've also got white children as well that become marginalized and alienated in those conversations. So then what happens then is we're all from these same environments, and the easiest thing then to do is to blame the person that's across the road. Then you have new communities that come in, then it's the Romanians' fault, it's everybody else's fault. And whilst we're all beefing on the ground, those in more elite and privileged and powerful positions will sit there saying, as long as it don't scratch and hurt our money, unalak can go on. Does that make sense?
Definitely.
So all of these things are kind of taking place, and I guess the part of the reason why I do what I do is about how do we develop an understanding, but don't sit with that kind of feeling of, I'm sitting in my room and I'm just vexed with the whole society, but let's talk about action. And this is what Malcolm used to talk about. You know, this is what Martin used to talk about later on in terms of his, you know, his civil rights activism. You know, this is what Garvey spoke about. This is what Douglas spoke about. These are the things that individuals was essentially saying, that we need to start doing something. So I translate that down to, after I've kind of, you know, gone through youth work, you know, as a youth worker, and then becoming a lecturer and a senior lecturer, and then leaving that to start my own company. And companies, these are the things that I'm interested in now. So I have one company that is a training and development company to develop professionals around responding to issues around serious violence as it relates to young people. I've got another company, which is a consultancy company, which is around advisory work. And I work with a lot of kind of not just statutory bodies, but work with the Premier League. And then also I've got a children's home, which I'm very proud of, where we've just got a 4-bedroom home. We've got 2 children in the home at the minute. And then now I'm just kind of going into some other things. You know, I had an online learning platform that didn't take off as well as I thought it would be. But I'm always just thinking about, number one, how can I maximize my potential, but also how do I bring people in? So the amazing thing about, you know, the work that I've done, I guess probably in the last 3 years, is a lot of my former students from the university, some of the young people I used to work with at one point in time, are now working for the organizations and giving them the platform to, I guess, thrive. And it's funny because I had a conversation with a friend yesterday, and there was like, I was bigging you up the other day to somebody in the community, and someone said to them, he said, Craig, I had to defend your name. And I'm like, what for? It's like, the person was saying, I don't bring nobody in, I don't help people out. And you remember when I was talking about the community and the environment and the expectation, there's also entitlement that comes with that.
Crabs in a barrel mentality.
Make sense? And it's interesting because when people say, you know, don't bring people in, I always say, what people are you referring to? Because if you was to look at my staff team and know who they were and how we were connected, you'd be like, of course I open the door. But what it is sometimes, and again, is that mentality where people are like, but you haven't helped me. And when people say you haven't helped me, going back to that mindset of not helping me, that then can translate to other things. And that's why when I use the example of like your nipsies and whatever, the second you do something that somebody don't like, they'll prepare to take you out. And I think it's sad that we even have to have these conversations, but, you know, as a real podcast and then having real conversations, these are the things that are really important, that you understand that this work comes with a consequence. 100%. People don't just open their arms welcomely, even though you're helping people. It sounds mad, isn't it?
And I think
that
also
you're helping people, but at the same time, people don't like you helping people.
I think it's also got to do with a spiritual journey as well, because once you've got the discernment, that's what gives you purpose to then say, you know what, I'm a part of the problem as well as there being a problem, because we all make society. And then I use me and my cousin who set up Hood Conscious, for example, how we talk, we've got the same mind, same like minds, but like hearts. So it's like how we started the podcast. You're like, you know, big up you guys for doing what you're doing. And then I'm like, So me and my cousin were very much like that, and I like to be around people who are like that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I feel like that's how hip hop started, and that's what's lost in hip hop now. It's more competitive, where before it's come from adversity and oppression. So it's like, yo, you're wearing bandanas, yo, that looks cool, man. But bandanas cost what, 25 pence back then. So it's not something expensive, but we made it valuable for how we treated one another. You know what I mean? But that's what's lost. It's just the killing, the robbing, and all the dysfunction
and the bad mind.
That's what, that's what's being promoted.
And
you know what I mean?
And that's what we're fighting against. You know, so when we talk about the concept of unity, that's what we are talking about. Is how do we, you know, bring people in to enable them to have that understanding that we can pass that on. And, you know, it's that old kind of, you know, Sankofa, you know, proverb, you know, each one teach one.
100%.
And that's what it's about. You know, how do we pass on that legacy? Because that's what this is ultimately about, is the legacy. How do we pass that legacy on? But whilst you're on that journey that you just mentioned, you know, you are going to have those different battles. And because I'm a man of faith, and I do believe in a creator, I know that I'm guided, but it doesn't remove the fact that I have to be street smart. And I think that's where I love the fact that I've come from a certain background, is because whilst I'm doing what I'm doing, it enables me to be just like, all right, then you're not going to move. And there's an old saying that, you know, if you stay in the hood too long, you know, it will suck you up and spit you out. So I just cut through. Does that make sense? I'm not going to be an individual that, you know, stays too long and not aware of my surroundings and my environment, and acknowledging that sadly there are people in the community that don't want good for the community.
That's 100%
and we come from
true.
a care background. You know, we can't use words like gangs and exploitation and the fact that young people are being used for county lines. That means there's individuals that want to exploit the youth for profit. So then that means people like us then that are coming in to try and smash and derail that particular mindset, so young people don't get exploited. There's going to be somebody that don't like the work that we do. So that so I always talk about, do we understand our open enemy in our community?
Yes.
And I think that we do this thing of, because it's our community and because it's our people, we kind of ignore the fact that there is an open enemy that's out there that's designed and created to destroy your thing. And that can come in many forms. That might be in a form of someone going to the youths and saying, yo, don't trust that man over there, you know, because when he goes to the schools, he works with feds. That's a typical one you hear oftentimes. You know, don't work with my man, you know, because he's going to give you details to such and such. So to kind of put that seed in the young people that, you know what, we don't want good, you know, we don't want benefit, we don't want to develop. And when you can create that mindset amongst young people, it almost becomes like remote control, where I don't need to hold people anymore now.
I feel like I'm going to go back to spirituality. I know I'm using the word spirituality and not religion for a reason. And I know that even spirituality is being branded and used in a certain way. But like, I've gone back to the Bible. I've got a Quran, but I've gone back to the Bible because that's what started in my family, the Bible. So I've gone back to the Bible and I'm reading through the Bible, and I'm starting to realize that Satan is a symbolism of lower energy. So that's the fear, what you're talking about. Jesus is symbolism. This is my own interpretation, is a symbol of the higher frequencies and the higher energies. And we go through the internal battle of heaven and how warring with each other within ourselves. You know what I mean? And I feel like that's spirituality needs to be revamped in a way so these young people of today can digest it a bit better in a more enjoyable way, so they can see it, because it's all the elements of everything's been made of, if that makes sense. So
I think the problem is that we've made, whether you want to use the word religion or spirituality, we've made it political. And it's become politicized to the point where we're prepared to take each other out on the basis of what we believe. Because I don't believe in that position that you just presented. Does that make sense? But I can respect it based on your subjective view. That's my point. So we can sit and reason, even though that I'm coming from a completely different background, but I'm able to hear you. But I'm not prepared to kill you over it.
Could you give me your, because I'm still, even though I've said that, I'm still open-minded to hear different views.
I think it's a long-winded conversation. It's a theological one. And I think, you know, coming from an Islamic background, I guess I have, you know, certain principles that I adhere to and I essentially follow. And, you know, when we talk about, you know, history and we talk about those that came before us that taught us a particular message, I guess one of the things that I'm interested in is how I develop my moral compass to reflect those individuals and how those individuals essentially live their lives. And what I'm saying is, and I think a point I'm trying to make was more about people can have a position based on how they view certain things, whether I hold that to be correct or incorrect. Does that make sense? But what I'm saying is, I'm not going to harm you on the basis of that. And 100%. I'm saying we live in a society now where cancel culture exists now. And you say anything now, everybody's sensitive. And it's like you don't even have that freedom of expression anymore. So you might make your position and I can say, I don't agree with that. And in 2-2s, I'm talking about, come, let's go outside. We need to have a conversation outside. And like, why are we fighting over a man's perspective? So when you actually translate that to the community, going back to your earlier questions, we are so destroyed as a people that we can't even look at each other as human beings anymore. That's the point I'm making. So it wasn't a philosophical or a theological response that I was making. It was more about, why can't we do that no more? Why can't we do that no more?
Because even from you disagreeing, I like to hear why people disagree, because that's the way I'm growing. Everyone who agrees with me, I'm not really going to gain nothing. So I like to be around people who have a difference of opinion, come from a different background, so they can educate me, because obviously I'm learning on my own path.
And young people are not taught that anymore.
You know what I mean?
So when we go back to the education system, that's not being taught. You know, when we talk about, how do you deal with one's emotions? How are you emotionally intelligent? How do you, understand your environment? So what we then see is just young people acting up based on their emotions. Young people are very emotional. So that's how I was saying, when you look at things like technology and social media, even when you look at music, I guess in terms of my PhD research, I look at the correlation between social media, music and violence. I talk about digital microaggressions and how people are so sensitive. So a man will spit a bar and I'm prepared now to go around to your yard and bust shots because we're so emotional. And when we look at the kind of trajectory of what young people are saying, I look at the kind of wider world of exploitation. And I talk about how multinational corporations benefit and profit off Black Death, and how it's very easy to repackage and market that, whilst those in the positions of power and influence continuously profit, but those that are going through what they're going through in the slums, in the communities, in the neighborhoods, are oftentimes the ones that have to pick up those pieces and deal with it. And then you got people like us then that want to help, that want to come into the community, and then you got people that then also say you shouldn't be helping because then who are you?
Yeah, definitely.
That's the society that we're in right now.
Definitely. And there's a lot of different angles of where it's like there's a lot of potholes and a lot of cracks in the walls, but there's a lot of people who are complaining about the cracks in the walls, and then those who want to fill the cracks in the walls, people complain about those people as well. So I'm just pulling it into
sometimes you can't
win. Analogy.
You got to push forward, man.
Definitely. So what do you feel over your years of experience donates to formulating a criminal mentality?
I think the things that we've just discussed, in my opinion, are those things. Society factors, social, economic factors, the political sphere, and government agendas that seem to keep shifting. And I think that whilst those political shifts that keep shifting, that has an impact on finance and the way in which institutions and organisations are resourced to be able to respond to those issues. So you look at cuts in the police, you look at cuts within, social care, you look at cuts within youth and community services, you look at cuts within services that help parents, and the more and more we kind of cut back and we're going into like a privatised kind of environment where companies are coming in and saying we can do the exact same work for less money, the quality of work and provision is not the same. So then what we've seen as a consequence is more people that are burnt out. We've seen organisations and companies that have reached their capacity where they can't take no more. Perfect example, as we both work in care, mental health of children and well-being. We've got CAMS and you've got other organisations that are designed to help. And I guess their inception was to help people that may have issues with their mental and their well-being. Now, because they've reached their capacity, because there's now so many children and young people in a contemporary environment that are dealing with so many different issues. Now they've got waiting lists now for like 6 to 8 to 9 to 12 months, and in some cases even longer. That's not to do with the systems, their organizations wrong. It's because the system has made so much cutbacks that then becomes a ripple effect. And then the other end of that spectrum is that you might then have people like myself and other individuals in the community that actually can provide counseling and therapy and support those children and young people, but the system can't afford it.
Yeah, makes sense.
So then they would rather the child go through the waiting game in the company and organisation that have reached their capacity, as opposed to say, listen, how much does that individual charge, and let's engage. And that's the problem that we're in right now. So when we're seeing the kind of, the issues that a lot of our children are dealing with, going back to your second question, I think that's also part of the problem of what creates those particular mindsets, is because one of the things that we don't look at is the mental health of our children and young people. You heard me mention earlier on trauma. We're talking about things like adverse childhood experiences. We've just come out of COVID-19. We're talking about a lockdown for a period of time that most human beings have never experienced before. And then we had Boris Johnson that just said, you know what, restrictions are done, go back to normal. But what's normal? Coming out of something that is abnormal. And then now we're in a society now where people have social anxiety, people are issues around suicide ideation, people are self-harming, people are self-medicating, smoking weed, taking Xanax, drinking lean. And these individuals now have to go on waiting list if they need help and support, when there's support and help in the communities. So we need to find a different way. Just to kind of respond to that, which is linked to your last question, is I think we need to think of a better way economically how we can support that, because it's demonstrated already that the system has zero interest in the mental health of our children and young people. And whilst we sit there waiting and complaining, and that's why I said we can't just keep blaming the system, what can we do in the community in order to engage with that? So that's why in terms of our provisions, like for example, our children's home, we have a therapist that happens to be black, that happens to work and understand the community, because he's cultural competent, he's also cultural responsible, but he's also cultural sensitive. And when you talk about those kind of little kind of nuanced skill sets, that's what's missing in a lot of different institutions. And when we talk about the education system, when we talk about the care sector, when we talk about, just working with adults in general, mental health and so on and so forth, those things around cultural competency, cultural sensitivity and cultural responsibility is oftentimes missing from that spectrum. And even one of the things when I talk about the notion of culture, I don't mean culture to necessarily mean black, because one of the things I spoke about earlier on is that when you look at some of the most disadvantaged communities, it's not just African, Caribbean children, you've also got the Irish children, and you've also got white British. So then what happens then is the context of those communities feeling alienated and marginalized within this current society. This is when you have individuals and groups that might have radical mindsets in order to pick those different people. So we've got young people that go to the far right, increasingly in this country, whilst everyone's still focusing on Muslims and Islam, what we're seeing is an increase in far right extremism across Europe, that the funding now can't even engage with that. And then you've got young people in the community, as I've just said before as well, they need money, they want money in their pocket, they got nothing really going on, and individuals are coming to them and giving them opportunities to leave the comforts of their homes and go and stay in a trap house outside of their region. So when we talk about the environments that's there, it's already been set. And I call it the trap. So when I work with a lot of young people or support organizations that are supporting other young people, my thing is about how do we get young people to identify the trap. And all the trap refers to is the system that's designed to adversely impact them in a range of different types of ways. And as Dr. Francis Cress-Welsing once said to us, is that when you understand the system, you're able to play it better. And all I'm saying is I'm just playing it better.
Makes sense. It makes sense. And especially with like the one, when you're talking about society as a whole, I'm not breaking it down into the stereotypical race and cultural differences. And then when you was talking about therapy as well, because that kind of hit home to me, because I've gone through the journey of therapy from requesting it through my organisation, what I'm employed by, to then looking for it myself personally. Because when I went through the work route, it weren't culturally aligned with me. It probably was culturally aligned with someone else. And then I've had to go my own route and find something which was more appropriate to my experiences. Not to say that the other therapy was bad. It just wasn't in alignment with myself.
Sure.
But I feel like within the inner city, they need people who understand the inner city culture, way of living, to help, like you said, people like ourselves, to help other people within the common experiences, what you've just explained, and a multitude of different levels. They need that support. You know what I mean?
Word.
So, you know, like going through your journey, what will be some of the pinnacle points of your journey, of some of the battles what you faced? Like, what would you say certain battles you faced, which, you know, like me and you just had a discussion and you disagree with something what I've said, and then further along the line, off camera, I can then ask you questions and then you may enlighten me.
Sure.
So what kind of struggles did you go through, and then where did you find, obviously you started from home, you said your dad was a pinnacle person, but what along your journey, who else has been a mentor for you, or what scenarios or situations have you gone through which was, wouldn't say traumatic but difficult, but you've learned from that experience to grow to where you are?
You know, one of the things I talk about a lot is that I was fortunate, and still am, that I've always had strong men around me that have been consistent throughout my journey. You know, so when I look at the relationship I have with my dad, I think that the offshoots of the other men in my life kind of just reflected that, but in a different type of way.
Okay.
So, you know, there's been times where, you know, when I was growing up, I'd get into some real deep situations, you know, and I'm talking ones that may have cost individuals their lives.
Okay.
But I always had individuals that I could refer back to me that got me to think about my decision making in that situation before I was about to make a particular decision, and get them to kind of they essentially was just ones that would just pull it down on the table. And I think I say this in my work, that you can't stop nobody from doing anything. But one of the things that we do have is the power to negotiate, to mediate, and to reason. And I think that these kind of key attributes that link to skills, I think is also another thing that we miss. And I think when I talk about that journey of mentorship, you know, talking about, you know, from my dad to Herman Wilson to Wes-I Booth, you know, to Dr. Carlton Howson, to, you know, Raymond Douglas, to Dr. Martin Glynn, to, you know, Cypher. You know, these are like strong men that I've had in my life that have always supported and reasoned with me. And, you know, being through situations, you know, as a, you know, a man myself that now is probably seen as a role model to many, it is about, well, what was the thing that they possessed? You know, what were the things that they essentially had in common? And the main thing was that they were just real, and they were around whenever I needed them. So it wasn't that they were around me every day, but anytime that I could pick up the phone, you know, that's what it is. You know, even, you know, the other day, like I remember calling Cypher. You know, I got so much love for Cypher, and the reason why I got so much love for Cypher is that when I first started youth work, when he used to have his studio down in Jury Quarter, he just come one day and just say, Craig, whenever you need the building, just said it. And it's just every Saturday morning, he just give me the keys, and then went about his business and told me just let him know when I finished with the thing. And that's how, if everybody remembers Real Talk in the community, that's how that first started, and that was Cypher. You know, and those are those people that just kind of came into my life and were just like, I see your trajectory that you're on, go on, do your thing. That's what I'm talking about. And that for me is a bringing. You know, when people are expecting handouts, it wasn't an economic one. You know, it was just one that, you know, I've got an opportunity here. I've got this kind of, you know, group of individuals that are, you know, got this momentum. And you know what's mad now, when I'm just thinking about what Cypher did, some of those individuals from Real Talk are now some of the staff from my care home. I didn't even think about it until you just asked the question. That's legacy. So when I talk about now, when I'm trying to help other individuals, it's more than just about, can I put money in your pocket? Even though that is important, it's about what other things can I help and instill. So one of the things I push a lot is education. So I say to people all the time, don't ask me for a job. You know, ask me about what opportunities is going to get you a job. And one thing I got links in is education. So I can put you on a course that's going to get you to college, that's going to get you to university. Even though I'm not saying that mainstream education is the thing, but what I'm saying is, for a lot of the individuals come from the environments that we understand, they're already pushed back by criminal records. They're already pushed back by not having any jobs before in the past. They're already pushed back because of their school experiences. So my thing is, if you can just get onto the conveyor belt of learning.
Yeah.
Whether we agree with it or not, then at least it puts you in a position, like everybody else, to be able to play the game.
And then I feel like teaching somebody about, like you're saying, just to have the thirst to learn, it's like teaching them how to fish instead of feeding them a fish each day. So then they can find what they need to do themselves and feed and eat. You know what I mean?
And that's the society
Longevity.
that we're living in.
Yeah,
you know, because it's about self and quick gratification.
Yeah.
What can you give me and what can I take from you? Yeah. Where nobody doesn't want to learn to be fishermen. Nobody doesn't want to learn to be fishermen.
It's true. But then you know what I've learned just from you giving me that backstory of yourself, because I'm quite different to you in my experiences of getting to where I am now.
Yeah.
But you had the foundation of your dad who was present within your household.
Yeah.
So then that's a positive role model, which you then would take that model and then take it into the world. It's like having your relationship with your mother. That first initial relationship creates the other relationships with other females, platonic and romantic, as you move forward. So you had a positive relationship with your dad. Not always, sometimes you probably was going against what he was saying, but as you got older, you start to see the importance and the gems dropped. So then when you went out into the community, into the wider world, you can say, oh, okay, this guy's speaking sense because my foundation is this. You know what I mean? Where a lot of us, we don't have that foundation. It's probably just mum. You get it? So that's very important. And I hope those younger individuals out there who don't have their dad present take from what you've just said and said, you know what? There are people within the community who probably, it's not always the finances they can give you, not the flashy cars, but the knowledge and opportunity and to presence. Them. And presence for you to assimilate and also, like you were saying, teach people how to fish and pass on the knowledge, because that's a very important thing generationally for our generations to stable out. We need to have like, not one way, but do you know, within the UK, if you go up north, it's still similar to what we're doing now. I feel that's one thing what's lost, even though there's many avenues and many different paths you could take.
It's family and it's home, it's the foundation.
Yeah.
And I feel like that is the best time to just big up the mothers, man, of our community as well, man. And, you know, whilst I talk about the strong, you know, men, I have to also talk about the strong women as well in my life as well, because, you know, I don't want these conversations to be one-sided in the sense as it was just about men. For me as a young man growing up in my community, I needed that male energy, you know, but I can't forget, you know, my nan, you know, I can't forget my mum and my aunties and, you know, your teachers at 104 and the Marcus Garvey Centre and Hockley Port and Handsworth Leisure Centre and all of these different places where there were strong women also that were supporting the men in being able to support us as well. So, you know, there's going to be enough people that would have remembered me from being a young buck just causing trouble and making peer noise with my little cousins, and I have to just pick up them also as well within that conversation. But ultimately what it is about is family, and I guess if there's one thing that I guess people can take from this podcast and this conversation, it's more about how do we start to really concentrate on our homes. You know, how do we really start to concentrate on relationships, you know, developing healthy relationships, because our children are like sponges and they watch and they observe everything. So if we're just in this situation where, you know, we're just in here for a bit and then we're getting off and we're in here for a bit and we're getting off and we're continuing this in that cycle that our grandparents didn't come with, that's when it perpetuates that mindset and those other behaviours that enable children and young people to fall into the trap. So if you're going for a situation right now and you know, you're going through a hardship, you know, just look at it in the context of legacy and start looking at how our grandparents looked at family, and let's try and connect to some of those traditional things. And it might not be in the same way in which they did, because in the context that we're living in, but family is important, you know, connecting with parents, connecting with, you know, your elders, I think is important, because that was the foundation that created me, and I'd like to believe that that's the foundation now I'm creating for my children.
I totally agree. Touching on, I just want to touch on this because time's started to wrap up. I understand that you're an entrepreneur. Could you just tell us, give us a long line of all your skills and talents and the businesses, what you've created?
As I said, I got 4 companies, but I've invested in quite some others. So I'm a silent partner with other companies as well. But I guess the main ones are Solve Global, which is a consultancy company.
Okay.
The Centre for Youth Violence and Conflict. That's where most people see me with.
Okay.
So I do a lot of work with the Premier League. You've probably seen me doing loads of stuff with all of the football clubs.
I've seen some
around the country. Working with Chelsea's first team. So working with Raheem Sterling and some of the players has been an amazing opportunity. And then doing a lot of kind of working in schools and supporting professionals across the local authorities. But then also I've got a children's home, which we're about to open house number 2. So I'm really proud of that as well. So
congratulations, bro. Congratulations, bro.
From the community. So hit us up if you've got any residential care experiences. As I said, there was another company that I developed that didn't work out in the way that I did, was the Learning Centre. It might be something I'll bounce back and think about in the next couple of months. And then also there's as I said, there's companies that I'm supporting as a silent partner, because now it's about how do I think economically now about my retirement plan. And I ain't trying to be doing this for the next 10 years. So it's now about the work that I'm doing now. That's why people probably see me grafting hard. I'm grafting because, as I said, I'm trying to get the bag that's going to help me to invest into other things that's going to help me to work things out. So like property and other things that I'm really, really interested and passionate about now is about just growing and developing, man. So,
longevity.
And I believe in role modeling to the young people, man. So, when I pull up in a spaceship, no, I didn't get it from drugs. It was legitimate. So ask me the question how you got it, because I think that when we talk about visual representation as well, as I think that we should be able to talk the talk in the same way in which the individuals that pull our children and young people into negativity, we should pull them into positivity. And it's not necessarily about showing them material things in order for them to elevate, but I think it's important that there is a conversation that we don't talk about in the community of how young people see success. I need individuals like me in the community to also show young people that there are so many ways that you legitimately
can make money and be successful.
And if I have to be one of those individuals to do that and also inspire the next generation of go-getters, but not losing themselves, then so be it.
Okay. So after someone's probably sitting down there and watching this podcast and thinking, yo, how do I get in contact with this guy? Can you just give some of your social medias or any email addresses?
I'm accessible,
contacts.
but you might go through a whole admin team. I'm not as reachable as I used to be. As you can imagine, I'm juggling how many different things and also got my personal life. But Instagram is where a lot of young people are right now. So, you just type my name, Craig Pinkney, CraigPinkney, not Craig Pinkney, it's Craig Pinkney. If you go to Twitter and type my name, LinkedIn, I'll also be there as well. If you go to YouTube and type my name, there's loads of videos that I've done. I do a lot of videos for young people, a lot of videos for parents, a lot of videos for professionals, and then obviously my website, www.craigpinkney.com. So I'm quite accessible in terms of the information, because I one of the things I love about these experiences, but it also creating content, is that's how you continue the message. And I always say to my peers as well, is make content, man. That's also part of the legacy as well. Let's not hide away from social media, because the young people are on TikTok now. So we need to start thinking about ways in which they engage.
And a lot of our old documentations have been destroyed, so we need to
be up to the time
and replenish what's been gone. So for those in 100 years, someone could pick this up and still get inspired. You know what I mean?
Real talk.
But Craig,
man,
I want to say thank you so much for coming on the platform. You've got a big message, very inspiring individual, and I hope to get you back on here. We can talk about your new home opening and where you're going in your trajectory moving forward.
Hopefully another 5 companies.
God willing, man. God willing. But blessings and thank you so much for coming on here. All right.